Mr. Speaker, last week, a UN panel released a deeply troubling report on the grave and horrific atrocities taking place across Syria. The report was mandated by the UN Human Rights Commission to investigate and record all violations of international law since March of 2011. The report outlines in painstaking detail the mass human rights abuses that innocent civilians must endure from both the Russian-backed Syrian offensive and terrorist groups like ISIS. Hospitals are deliberately targeted, 33 in Aleppo alone, resulting in mass civilian casualties. In blatant disregard of core human rights laws, starvation has systematically been used as a weapon of war. Over 450,000 people are currently trapped in besieged towns and villages in Syria, and thousands are at risk of starving to death. Schools and playgrounds and other public spaces are routinely shelled to inflict the maximum amount of terror on innocent civilians. The report tells of attacks on a girls' school in Douma where 19 civilians were killed. And even though there were no military objectives, government forces attacked the school twice, the second attack taking place during first aid evacuation efforts. Now, last month, Secretary Kerry helped negotiate a temporary 2-week ceasefire with Russia, which was supposed to end the fighting and allow delivery of aid to besieged towns. Unfortunately, like the deal we struck with Russia on Assad's use of chemical weapons, this ceasefire merely locks in the gains achieved by the Assad regime and gives Russia outsized influence in shaping the future of the Middle East. Regardless, the terms of the agreement were almost immediately violated. Any hope of a sustained peace was dashed this week with the almost immediate and predictable breach of ceasefire agreement. On Sunday, the Syrian opposition released a letter documenting violations of the ceasefire agreement by the Assad regime, Russia, and Iranian-backed militia. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit this letter for the record.
Without objection.
These violations discussed in this letter are comprised of barrel and cluster bomb attacks and a number of ground incursions against opposition groups which had entered into the truce. In the first 2 days alone, there were more than 29 documented deaths of mostly women and children and dozens of injuries. This is during the alleged ceasefire. Some believe that this far-off conflict isn't affecting communities throughout America, but Mr. Speaker, I rise today to say they are wrong. I routinely meet with Syrian Americans in Indiana who share stories of the devastation their loved ones are experiencing back in their homeland. Listening to them recount the struggles of their family reminds me that if we are to adhere to our values as a nation, we must defend the vulnerable and expand basic human liberty. Standing idly by as bombs rain down on hospitals or as Assad uses starvation as a method of warfare is an abdication of what we stand for as a nation. But that's exactly what we've done. This president's insistence on diminishing American power abroad has empowered Putin to step into the leadership vacuum, has bolstered Assad in Syria, and has prolonged the conflict. We must not succumb to difficulty. We must take a stand and start meaningfully engaging our allies and strengthen the moderate Syrian forces, like the Kurds on the ground, to fight to replace the Assad regime. Both my constituents and the nation's top military advisors know that doing so is the only way to bring any long-term stability to Syria. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.